He needs. He's asking you to do something that you need, and you need it because He created you in that way, that you need prayer, you need the spiritual connection with God. But the prayer requires a high level of commitment, as we mentioned. So to do the prayer on time, to do it every day, to do it the correct way, it's not so easy. Why? Because life has ups and downs. And Allah knows this. So Allah has given us some concession. He has given us some way to make things a little bit easier in certain circumstances, because He knows in those circumstances it can be difficult to do the prayer perfectly or to do it fully. Two of those situations, we'll talk about them today, are how do we pray when we're sick, when we're physically sick, right? And how do we pray when we're traveling? Because also when you travel, you may be very busy and you may find that you're not able to commit to the prayers as you do when you're comfortably at home, right? So Islam is a very understanding and practical religion and has given us some concessions in that area. So they say here on page 136, for those that have the book and are following along, a Muslim must offer the obligatory prayers under all circumstances as long as he is fully conscious and in full possession of his mental faculties. So the first rule to remember is that prayer always must be done. The only time you're excused from doing prayer is if you're unconscious. For example, you're in a coma, or you're under anesthesia, or you're asleep, right? When you're sleeping, you're not conscious of what's going on around you, so a person may oversleep the prayer accidentally. So this would be a reason why you might miss the prayer. But if you're awake and you're sane, because a person who's insane also becomes like someone who is unconscious. They don't really know and remember what's going on around them. You may talk to them later if they went back to normal and say, do you remember what you said and did? And they say, I have no idea, right? So that's the only time when you're exempt from missing the prayer. Otherwise, you have to pray under all circumstances. And all circumstances means all. Even here, they don't talk about it, but there's a special way to pray when you're in the battlefield and you're experiencing war. Imagine now the Muslims in Gaza. You're living in terror and fear, and there's bombings, and you still have to pray. Why? Because you need Allah. You need Him all the time. Just like you have to eat under all circumstances. A person won't say, because there's war, I can't eat. They still look for food, and they search for food every day because you need food to survive. You also need spiritually prayer. You need to have that connection with Allah. And if anything, you need Him more in those times of need than you need Him at other times when things are comfortable, right? So prayer is something very important and should never be abandoned under any circumstances. Now, they say here though, Islam does, however, take into account people's various situations and special needs. Hence, its legislation regarding sick people. So now we're talking about, I can pray, but I can't physically perfectly do the prayer because of my sickness. Maybe my sickness is an injury in the leg, and it requires that I be sitting, or I have a cast on my leg, or I'm in a wheelchair, or I'm so weak, I'm so exhausted by fever, by whatever procedure, maybe I'm having dialysis or this one or that one. So there can be numerous manifestations of an illness or an injury that prevents me from praying properly. So the Prophet ﷺ gave us the general rule. If you can pray standing up, do so. If you cannot, then pray sitting down, right? And that would mean you're sitting on the floor, or you're sitting in a chair if you must. If it's too hard for you to get down on the floor, you're sitting on a bed, whatever it might be, right? If you cannot offer it sitting, so the person is fully paralyzed, for example, or the person is so exhausted and hooked up to machines that they must lay down fully, then you can pray even in a laying position, no problem, right? So each part of the prayer, do as much as you can. A person may be able to stand, but he cannot bow because of whatever injury or issue he's having. Maybe he can bow, but he cannot prostrate down because the blood cannot go to the head because there's a wound there or something like that, right? So you have to gauge the situation accordingly. So here it says if he is too sick to stand up, or if offering the prayer in a standing position is bound to delay recovery, he's allowed to offer it in a sitting position. So two things: either you just can't do it, physically you can't do it, you're in a wheelchair, you're paralyzed, then you can't stand, right? Or you could stand, but it's going to make your injury or your sickness worse. Allah doesn't want that. He doesn't want you not to get better, right? So you need to treat your body in a way that will allow it to heal and recover. So you can do it sitting. If he cannot possibly do so, then he can offer it while lying down on his side, right? He can do it while offering it lying down on his side. The Prophet ﷺ said, pray standing. If you cannot do so, pray in a sitting position. If you cannot do so either, then pray on your side. And a person may find that they can start the prayer standing, but they cannot continue the whole prayer standing. Maybe very elderly person or someone who's very weak and tired. So they may find that, okay, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to do takbirat al-ihram and start the prayer like that, and then I'm going to sit down and finish the rest of the prayer sitting, for example. Okay? That would be fine, inshallah, if you find that it's too difficult for you to stand throughout the entire thing. It says here, if you cannot do so either, then pray on your side. So if you can lie, then lie. If you can move, pray on your side. If you cannot do that, you can be lying on your back, then no problem. Again, it's do it as much as you can. If you cannot move your body parts at all, you're fully paralyzed, right? Or you're fully sedated by something that doesn't allow your body to move, you can still pray with your mind. No problem, right? Say the words even if you can't move. Now, it gives another example. If he cannot bow or prostrate, he may only lean forward as far as he can. So for example, let's say you're sitting or even you're praying standing, but you can't bow for whatever reason. There's an injury in the head, there's something, right? Or you cannot prostrate. Then for the bowing or the prostrating, just lean a little bit. Like for example, when we're on the airplane, we can't really bow and prostrate. We're just sitting in the chair, right? So you might find when it comes time to bow, you're just going to lean forward a little bit. That would be sufficient because you cannot stand up and do a proper bowing. So just do physically as much as you can. And for prostration, if you cannot put your face on the ground, if you're praying in a normal environment or on the airplane, then you may just lean forward a little bit further, right? To show that it's similar to the prostration, even though you cannot do it fully. If he cannot sit down on the floor, he may sit on a chair or anything similar. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when they prayed sitting, they were praying on the floor. Sometimes the person's problem is they cannot get down on the floor. Nowadays, many people have issues with their knees, with their back. They're overweight, they're very elderly, for example. So they need to pray sitting, but they cannot get down. If they get down, it's going to be so hard to get back up. So they may just sit on a chair, for example, or a stool, as we can see many times people are doing in the mosque. And that would be fine if necessary. If he cannot perform wudu, we already spoke about this to some extent during the tahara, during the chapter on purification. We talked about what to do if you cannot wash the limb because of an injury or an illness, right? What you can do, you can wipe over if there's a bandage or a cast instead of washing it. Or you can do tayammum if you're not allowed to touch water or use water or don't have access to water. We talked about that in detail. Here they bring up one issue. They said if he cannot perform wudu for every prayer due to a sickness, but he could do it every once in a while, for example, he may combine the afternoon and the late afternoon prayer and the sunset and the late evening prayer. There might be some difference of opinion among scholars about this, but in general, we could combine prayers if there's a need to do so. If there's a need to do so, right? It's not something to be done so casually, but we find combining of prayers is something that the Prophet ﷺ did when he was traveling. It's something that he would do when it was raining, for example, if there was very heavy rain and it was going to be hard for people to move around due to some flooding and so on, then you might find that they would combine the prayers in the mosque. So people didn't have to come back again, right, to make it a bit easier. So too, if the person is very sick and it's very difficult for them to be conscious for the 5 prayers and or doing the washing for the 5 prayers, they may find then a valid enough excuse to be able to combine the prayers. And the combining is done in that fashion. So we don't combine all 5 prayers, or we don't combine numerous prayers in one time, but we combine specifically the daytime prayers, Dhuhr and Asr, and we combine the evening prayers, which are Maghrib and Isha. Fajr, we never combine it with anything. So if you're combining, then you would pray 3 times in the day instead of 5. And you wouldn't shorten because you're not traveling here, right? You would just combine without shortening. If he cannot use water due to his illness, which we talked about before, he may perform tayammum instead and then offer the prayer. So some people may not be able to access water because they cannot get to the water physically, or it cannot be brought to them, or it might be because they cannot touch the water. The water is going to make their wound or their injury after surgery or whatever it might be, it's going to make it worse, right? Or it's going to even lead to their death, as it happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One man, they insisted after he was wounded to shower, and when he did, the water killed him. And the Prophet ﷺ was so upset. He said, they killed him, may Allah kill them. If they had only asked, the cure for ignorance is asking, right? If they didn't know the answer, they shouldn't have given a wrong answer. They should have asked someone who was more knowledgeable to give the right answer. So this is about sickness in a nutshell. You may find you have a very specific scenario, or maybe one of your elderly loved ones or relatives. You can then ask a sheikh, get a fatwa, get the right answer if you're not sure how to handle that situation, okay, in terms of how to pray or how to do the purification for the prayer. But we do want to encourage those who are sick or those who are elderly and bedridden and so on, still to continue on with their prayers as long as they're sane, as long as they're conscious. Maybe the elderly sometimes reach a point due to dementia or Alzheimer's or senility where they cannot pray anymore. They don't know actually what they are doing or where they are or who they are. This person then becomes exempt from having to pray. But if they are conscious, they know what's going on, they know what they need to do, then we should be reminding them and encouraging them to do the prayer as best as they can. Even if they cannot stand up, they can still do the prayer as we mentioned. Okay, any questions about that? So this is something important for us to keep in mind, not to be tricked by shaitan to say, okay, it's really hard for me to pray right now, so I'm just going to skip it and I'll start it again once I feel better. No, you still should pray as best you can. Yeah. Yeah.
But just lean.
Well, you see, the sunnah is that you actually pray on the ground. But the problem for many of us in this day and age is that we haven't taken good care of our bodies. So we're overweight and the knees are shot and the body is just in a position where the person cannot even get down and like bend their knees and sit on their legs in that position, right? So some have said, of course, if you cannot sit like that, you could sit cross-legged, you could sit with your legs straight out, you could sit in any way. But for some who are elderly or sickly, even that, they find it's almost impossible. So the person has to gauge for themselves. What can I do comfortably? Because you are not supposed to do it if it's causing you, for example, a lot of pain and making your situation worse, because then you will not even concentrate on the prayer itself. So you want to pray in the way that you are feeling comfortable enough to pray. But it doesn't mean, like for example, you would find some of the Sahaba, they would come to the prayer being carried by 2 people with their arms over their shoulders, like they're kind of dragging them, because their fever is so high and they're so exhausted, they cannot walk to the mosque by themselves, but they didn't want to miss the prayer in the mosque. So they would push themselves and they would come. And then they would get in the row and they would kind of, maybe have to lean against people or even use a cane or something like that, and they would come and pray. So that's how important they saw prayer was, and doing prayer standing as much as possible. Where for many of us today, we might be taking an easy way out without a valid enough reason. So we need to really gauge, do I need to sit or not? And like you said, if the person can sit on the floor, maybe start the prayer standing, do takbirat al-ihram, then go down and sit, that might be better. So then they can do, for example, the sujood and all those kind of things, right? Rather than sitting on a chair throughout the prayer. Allah knows best. Any other questions? The sister there is gonna, I'll come back to you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
If a person goes to an operation, a surgery,
Okay,
she's under sedation,
okay.
does she have to qada that period where she's not conscious? Because qada is, I think based on the hadith, it's either you fall asleep or you forget.
There's a difference of opinion among scholars on this matter. If a person goes fully unconscious, or if they go insane for a while, then they come back to their wits and their mind. Do they have to make up everything that they've missed during that time or not, and so on? When I asked a scholar about this for my own father when he had like a brain surgery and also when he went through his stroke and so on, if it's for a shorter period of time, because surgery many times is just for some hours, then they should make up the prayer once they're conscious and able to do so. Allah knows best. They should make it up. Inshallah, Allah will accept that from them. And they had a valid excuse where they were fully unconscious. They couldn't do the prayer at that time. If timing can be selected, then try to select it where it won't impact prayers. So for example, if you can choose to do it at a certain time and the surgery is going to take 4 hours, so do it in a way where you could do the prayer right before. And when you come out and you're awake again, it's still some window left for that next prayer. For example, when you combine 2 prayers, usually it's going to be 5-6 hour window, right? Sometimes surgeries can be longer than that is the problem, or the sedation takes a long time to wear off. So they may go under like half an hour or an hour before surgery, and then it takes hours or half a day for them to come up fully and be conscious of what's going on. So they may end up missing multiple prayers. Allah knows best. They could still make those up, inshallah, once they are capable of doing so. Allah knows best. No question? Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, the next one we'll end with is the traveler's prayer. So this is another time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a rukhsa. He's given us a concession that makes things a little bit easier. And that is that when you're in a state of travel, you're busy, you're tired, you're moving around, your situation is not very stable. Even with the modern conveniences of travel today, it's still kind of hard and tiring, right? You're on the plane part of the time, you're rushing through the airport to get to your flight, you're in a taxi, you're taking a train, you're moving around. So it's not so easy to stop and do the 5 daily prayers and to do them all on time in the normal way. So here it says, a traveler may, when moving from one place to another, or during his temporary residence which lasts less than 4 days, shorten the 4 rak'ah prayers to 2 each. Thus he offers 2 units instead of 4 for the dhuhr and the asr prayers and the late evening isha prayer, unless he prays behind a resident imam, in which case he must follow suit. So what does it mean? The first thing you can do while traveling, and here they say this is mainly about doing it while you're in transit, while you're moving from one location to another, and if you're staying in a location for a short period of time. Majority of scholars are of the opinion that travel shortening is only done if you're in a place for less than 4 days. If you're going to stay somewhere for a longer period of time, then their opinion is that you cannot continue shortening the prayers. You would pray the full extended prayer as usual, rather than shortening. If you're going to stay in a place for a month, for 3 weeks, for example, then you wouldn't shorten any longer. Other scholars said no, and their opinion is that as long as you're under the category of traveler, right? And some have caveated that by saying, when you stay in a place for a long time, but you don't know exactly when you're going to leave. So you're always in this kind of status of traveler. You haven't really settled down because you think you may leave, but you're not sure when the travel is going to be. So the opinion I personally follow is if I'm staying somewhere more than 4 days, then I'm going to pray like a resident. I won't pray like a traveler anymore. I'll only pray like a traveler on the day when I was traveling in or traveling out of that place. That's personally the opinion that I follow, which is the majority opinion. So first thing you can do as a traveler is shorten. And that means 3 of the 5 prayers, we shorten them by cutting them in half. So that already makes it a little bit easier for you. Instead of praying the full 4 units, you only pray 2. Can we shorten Fajr prayer? No, it's already a 2-unit prayer. Leave it as is. Maghrib, can we shorten it? It's a 3-unit prayer. We also leave it as is. We don't shorten it any further. Okay. Number 2, they said, he may leave off the supererogatory prayers. What does supererogatory prayers mean? What are these super prayers? We're talking about the voluntary extra prayers. Supererogatory is a fancy word for the extra voluntary optional prayers. So these are not the prayers that are a must, like the 5 daily prayers. So for example, before the Fajr, we usually pray how many rak'ahs? 2 rak'ahs. That's a sunnah prayer, right? Before Dhuhr, we usually pray how many rak'ahs? 4, right? This is a sunnah. So when the Prophet ﷺ was traveling, many of these prayers, he wouldn't do them. He wouldn't do them. And the beautiful thing is the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah will reward you when you are sick or when you are traveling for those things that you used to do as if you're still doing them. So if you used to fast sunnah, like Monday, Thursday, for example, and then you were traveling and you couldn't fast those days, Allah will reward you as if you fasted them. And the prayers that you don't do, the voluntary extra prayers, He'll reward you also as if you did them, even though you don't do them. And Allah is generous and kind. So the Prophet ﷺ used to only offer the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr all the time, even when he was traveling, even when he was going to war. He would always offer the 2 units before Fajr prayer, no matter what. Those 2, he said, those 2 units, they take you 3 minutes or less to pray. They're better than the whole world and everything in it. Trillions of dollars don't equal those 2 units of prayer. So don't ever miss them. Try to do them all the time. The Prophet ﷺ would do them even when he was traveling. But the other sunnahs, he would not do them. So it's sunnah not to pray sunnah when you're traveling. Okay? So somebody might say, no, I want to do all of them. No, the sunnah is not to do them. Not to do them. You can pray qiyamul layl, you can pray night prayers if you want, right? But the normal sunnahs, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do them. He may combine the afternoon prayer and the late afternoon prayer. So now comes another concession, and that is that you can group prayers together. Grouping them together means you do them one right after the other. You do them back to back. Instead of having to worry about doing each one in its set time frame, you now have an extended time frame and you can do it any time during that window. So for example, I'm going to combine Dhuhr and Asr. That means I can pray anywhere from 1:30 p.m. all the way until what? All the way until Maghrib, 7:30. That means I have a 6-hour window to do the 2 prayers combined. And the combined means I'm praying 2 units and then 2 units. So I'm praying only 4 units total. So it's as if I'm doing 1 prayer. So Allah has made it easier. You have, instead of a 3-hour window for each prayer, 6-hour window, to do the two prayers shortened and combined. Combined means you don't pray them as one, you pray them as two separate prayers, but you do them right back to back. And you can do them anytime. You can do Dhuhr and Asr during Dhuhr. We call this Jam'u Taqdeem, right? Bringing the prayer earlier. You brought Asr earlier. Or you can do Jam'u Ta'khir, delaying, by delaying the Dhuhr and praying it during the Asr time. And then you do Dhuhr and Asr. Whichever time you choose, you still do the prayers in order. Dhuhr comes first, Asr comes next. So even if it's Asr time, and I'm going to pray, I haven't prayed Dhuhr yet, so I pray Dhuhr first and then Asr. Okay? So this is how we do traveler prayer. We shorten and we combine. Which prayers can we combine? We can only combine Dhuhr with Asr. We cannot combine, for example, Fajr and Dhuhr. No. Fajr cannot be combined with anything. Dhuhr and Asr, and then we can combine Maghrib with Isha. All right? Can we combine Asr with Maghrib? No, not allowed, right? The combining is specific and done in that way. So here it says, he may combine the afternoon prayer and the late afternoon prayer and the sunset prayer and the late evening prayer at the due time of either of them. This serves to ease the hardship he undergoes while traveling. All right. Any questions about that? Clear, inshallah? Any questions, any comments you want to ask? I can tell. No? Go ahead, sister.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Just now you said like if we travel less than 4 days, then we
Yeah.
have to pray full raka'ah, right? The majority of the opinion says. So.
No, the majority opinion is you can shorten and combine for less than 4 days.
Oh.
Like 3-4 days, 2 days, 1 day, if your travel is short. But if you're going to reside somewhere for a long period of time, then they would say you start praying usual prayers.
Oh.
You start praying like a resident. So if you're going somewhere and you're going to stay there for a few months studying, or you're going to go there and you're going to stay on vacation for a full month or 3 weeks, for example, then they would say you pray like a normal prayer. But the day you're traveling in, the day you're traveling out, you're going to pray like a traveler. That would be fine. Yeah,
Right.
While you're in transit, while you're moving and so on, even if you're going to stay at a place for a long period of time, while you're actually traveling, that's specifically the time where you're going to need this the most. Once you've settled somewhere, you've rented an apartment, an Airbnb, a hotel, whatever, then you're already pretty settled. But the issue is more about while you're moving around, right? At that time, they're going to be traveling by camel, by horse, by foot. Nowadays, you're traveling maybe by bus, by airplane, by boat. That's the time while you're moving, you're in airports and all that, that you need this kind of concession the most to
Okay.
combine and to shorten and so on.
All right. And another question is like if when you want to shorten your prayer,
Yeah.
requirements is you have to be a traveler. But what about jama', combine the prayer? Is there any requirement or?
So,
you can
so
just-
jama', as we said, can be done if there's a need. So the Prophet ﷺ did it when there was heavy rain, or he did it, as is even mentioned, sometimes without a reason, although many scholars are of the opinion that there should be some kind of valid reason to do so. So the combining, like we said, with the sick person, if they absolutely need to do it because there are some constraints on them that are not going to allow them to do the tahara or to be able to do the prayer properly, then they may combine. The traveler also combines due to need, because there's a need to combine, right? Qasr, shortening, is only related to traveling. Combining is for traveling and for other reasons as well. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Jazakallah.
Wa iyaakum. Any other questions or comments? Yes, brother?
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
As-salatu was-salam.
when he went from Mecca to Medina,
Yeah.
he stayed there more than 4 days,
Yeah.
and he was shorting.
And he shortened, yeah.
Yeah. So you said when you stay more than 4 days, you don't have to short.
Yeah.
You have to,
So the fuqaha, they have some ta'leel for that, why they say he may have done that. And the issue, as we mentioned, like some Sahaba, they went to Azerbaijan and they prayed like travelers for 6 months. But there was an intention that they are going to travel or return at any moment. And then they got stuck by weather and by various reasons, and their travel kept having to be delayed. So this is where the fuqaha, the jurists, they look at these evidences and they try to determine and establish why. Why did the Prophet ﷺ do it this way, or why did he do it that way, and so on. And then they come up with these kind of constraints. As I said, some scholars are of the opinion that as long as you're under category of traveler, pray like a traveler, doesn't matter how long it is. But that's not the majority opinion. The majority opinion is that it should be restricted, and they restrict it based on some practice that they feel they find in the Prophet ﷺ's life. And the time when he did it more, there was a reason why he allowed it to be done for a longer period of time. That's their justification. Allah knows best. I'm following them in that. I'm not a scholar or a mujtahid. So I don't have my own independent opinion on the matter. Jazakallah khair. So if you have studied the matter well and you're comfortable with a specific opinion, you can follow that opinion, and you will be justified on the Day of Judgment, inshallah, if you followed people who you believe are knowledgeable and righteous in that opinion. Allah knows best. Yes, sister.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
How far do we have to travel to be considered and categorized as a traveler?
So again, this is one that the scholars debate as well. Some of them have come up with a distance based on what they tried to look at the Prophet ﷺ's practice during his time and say, okay, that's a minimum distance. Like the minimum distance you all are familiar with is what? Huh? It's about 80, 85 kilometers, right? And that is because they took a measurement of a distance that the Prophet ﷺ traveled in one of his travels and said, okay, that's the minimum that you need to travel for it to be considered travel. Other scholars said, no, the definition is broader than that. It's about you went a distance that took you outside of the city limits where you live. So for some people that could be you went from here to the airport. The airport is maybe less than 80 kilometers from here, but they would say, that's it. You've already left PJ, you've already left Klang Valley, and you've gone to some other area. You've driven through area where there aren't even, for example, some houses or civilization. It's some jungle or plantations. So that's already considered travel. So these are the two opinions. For me, again, to be on the safe side, I follow the one that says you should go a sufficient distance of about 80, 85 kilometers. Allah knows best. Okay. And that's not very far. I mean, nowadays, if you went from here to maybe like Port Dickson or Kuala Ganda or something like that, you're already going to hit that kind of distance. Allah knows best. Any other questions or comments on this? Yes, sister? Okay.
For instance, if we have back-to-back meetings and we find it difficult to perform perhaps Zuhur, can we just jama' but not kasar?
Personally, I wouldn't do it. Personally, I wouldn't do it. I would say the person should find the way to take the 5 minutes and do the prayers on time and in their time slots. Because you find the Prophet ﷺ being even in times of war or other severe times and so on, and he's still ensuring that prayers are done within their time ranges and in their time slots. But as I mentioned, there is the opinion that does say you can combine occasionally, even without a valid reason. Allah knows best. But many of the scholars don't agree with that opinion and would say that there should be some kind of a reason to justify it. And being busy with office job and meetings is maybe not valid reason, not strong enough reason. So if we have some control over our meetings and our schedule, then we should schedule accordingly. So for example, a practice we've done in the company I work for is they've said, don't set meetings to 30 minutes or 1 hour, set it to 25 minutes or 55 minutes. So there's at least 5 minutes between meetings. Otherwise, what happens is people are in back to back to back to back to back meetings. And we're not machines. We're not supposed to operate like that. So it's taking a toll on people's mental health. They can't even get a bio break, they call it, to go to the toilet or something like that. So it's not a human way to live, meeting after meeting after meeting. And some people are doing that for 8 or 10 hours continuous. Even the lunch, they're doing it while they're in the meeting or something like this, right? So it's not a way to live. So just like they're gonna make time to go smoke cigarettes or go use the toilet, we're making time to go pray. So try to adjust the meeting schedule around that and make prayer priority number one, rather than feeling there's an easy way out, I'm just gonna always combine. Because otherwise what happens, some people get in this habit of, well, I just combine regularly because I'm always busy.
Okay, when I say back-to-back meetings, it's meetings not within our control, it's outside of our office. That's
Physical.
what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are not in control of that.
Yeah.
Those schedules of those meetings.
Yeah.
Okay, I get you on that. On another note, if we get...
I mean, the good thing is that you live here. So we live in a Muslim country. I mean, for example, I was doing a program for a large institution here, IT program. And so I'm meeting with the COO and all these top people. They have thousands of employees who work for them. But, you know, half the people in the meeting are Muslim. So I said, meeting is a board meeting. It's going to run for 1 or 2 hours, but we're going to miss Maghrib prayer. So I told them, I have to step out and pray. Sorry, you know, you guys want to continue on, you continue on, but I'm going to step out, I'm going to pray. So they all feel ashamed because half of them are Muslim. So the COO stops the meeting and said, we all go take a break. So they will go for it. So you have to kind of push your way a little bit because we're amongst Muslims. So the Muslims should be prioritizing these kind of things, right? So try to take advantage of that. If we were in America or somewhere else, then it's a little bit hard because you're the one in the whole company who's Muslim and there's nobody cares about what you need and all that, right? But there, they might be more accommodating than here, unfortunately, which is the sad part. Because the non-Muslim, as soon as you bring up something related to religion and your needs, they get a little bit nervous. Okay, don't sue us, you know. They're afraid of discrimination and racism and this one and that one. So they bend over backwards to accommodate you, actually. Where here, you're sometimes around Muslims who aren't very practicing, so the other people are looking at you like, oh, are you weird or what? Because the others, nobody really cared about this before. But you have to be a little bit overconfident and just kind of push it. So I would say even excuse yourself, walk out of the meeting. They think you're going to the bathroom, they don't know. Go pray and come back. Allahu Alam.
Okay, on another note, what if we get stuck in a jam, a traffic jam?
Yeah.
And you know, the time for example, Asr is almost over. We started our journey before the Azan of Asr. And there have been instances where, you know, there's a flood somewhere and the whole, you know, the roads are jammed. So how do we do this prayer in the car?
Yeah, I mean, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah doesn't hold a person accountable for more than they can control and more than they can bear. So the issue is, there's a flood, you said, there's a huge traffic jam, you're stuck, no way for you to get out and so on, then you're excused already. I mean, you know, this is something now beyond your control. As soon as you get to a place and a situation where you can pray, then you pray. But if you're driving the car, you cannot really pray while you're driving. If there's a way to pull over, pray on the side of the road, do it. You know what I mean? If there's a way to pull over, pray in the car while sitting in the car, do it. If there's no such thing, you're in the middle of the highway, there's no shoulders, there's no stopping, and the traffic is all jammed around you, then you may have no choice, right? But also try to plan those things out. So many times when we're driving at the end of the day, we're going to hit with Maghrib time. And the window for Maghrib is short, that's a problem. So try to time it where you pray before you get on the road, or you're ensuring you can get off the road before the Maghrib time is over. But for many of us, we're leaving work at maybe just before Maghrib, and we know we're gonna get in a 45-minute, 1-hour jam, and we may miss the prayer. Then that's like poor planning. Maybe delay, pray, and then leave right after Salah, for example, right? So we have to think ahead a little bit on those matters, because a lot of traffic patterns are routine.
Okay, in Malaysia, sometimes when we're in those kind of situations, in the traffic jam and all, they always say, okay, Salat Isyarat. Is there such thing as Salat Isyarat?
Salat Isha?
Isyarat.
Ishara.
I think.
So what do they mean? Like just pray by moving your head? Ishara means like to gesture. And like I said, if you could pull over and pray safely, then you could pray in the car. If you can't get out of the car because it's not safe or there's no room or space, then you could pray sitting in the car, just like you'd pray on an airplane. When the airplane is going to be in the flight for so many hours, you're going to miss the prayer time. So what do? We pray sitting in the chair. We have no choice. And we may even pray without facing the qibla because we have no choice again. So you pray according to your circumstances as best you can. I mean, scholars in the books of fiqh, they go to extreme. For example, and it's happening to Muslims today, they may imprison someone in a prison cell where he cannot see the daylight, so he doesn't even know if it's day or night. And they will make him naked, so he cannot even cover his awrah. And they will make the place with urine and feces, so he cannot have cleanliness from najasa. There's no water for him to use to make wudu or ghusl or anything like that. So he's gonna be forced, if he wants to pray without fulfilling any requirements of salah. No wudu, no covering awrah, no knowing the prayer time is in, no facing the qibla, nothing. Is he excused from praying? He's not. The scholar said he still has to pray as best he can. They even talk about what's the best position to pray in to cover his awrah as much as possible. Pray sitting instead of standing, and they come up with the whole details of it. Why? Because it's a real scenario that exists, unfortunately. It's happened past, and it's happening even today to people, unfortunately. May Allah save them. So again, pray according to the situation. So if you're in the car, you can pull over, you can pray, but you can't face the qibla or you don't know where the qibla is, just pray. You cannot stand up. You're going to pray with ishara, meaning like by signaling or gesturing. But ishara meaning like I'm going to use my finger to do ruku' and sujood and stuff like that, I never come across any evidence for that. You should pray using your body as much as you can, even if you can't stand up fully and so on. Yeah, sister?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
For the person who gets distracted, like there's a loud noise outside and suddenly, oh, I don't remember if I just did the raka'at, and then
Okay.
they stand back up again, and they suddenly remember though. They suddenly remember, oh, I did it already.
Okay.
Do they finish the raka'at or do they sit back down and continue from where they left off?
No, I didn't get it. So what position were they in when they heard the sound?
So for example, they have, okay, if it's Maghrib, and they think they've gotten to the third raka'at,
Okay.
but there was a loud noise in the second one, so now they're not sure. Did I actually do that? I'm not sure. So they, after the third raka'at, they stand up to make up the second raka'at, and then they suddenly remember because of something. Oh, I've done the second one.
So
did they finish that?
So they thought that the rak'ah they just finished could be the second one or could be the third one.
Yes.
Now they've stood up. Now they realize this is a fourth rak'ah.
Yes.
Okay. Then they must sit back down because it's not allowed to do more than what's allowed for that prayer. So if they've already finished 3 and they're sure they finished 3, they cannot continue on in a fourth rak'ah.
So then they just finish off with the tashahhud.
Yeah, they just sit back down and go right to the end of the prayer, make tashahhud, and then do sujood sahu to make up for adding on something additional by accident.
Okay.
Now, the scholars debate about if you're in a state of doubt, like you mentioned. You don't know, is it this or is it that? Usually, you build off of certainty. So if I say, okay, I don't know if I finished 2 or I finished 3, then I assume I finished 2 because that one I'm sure of. And the third one I'm not sure of. Then I pray one more and pretend like the one I'm doing now is the third one. And I do sujood sahu. If it's not 50-50, it's like 60-40. I'm leaning towards probably I have done 3. And I can kind of remember, I think I remember making dua like this and I read this surah. So I'm pretty sure that I have done the 3. But it's not 100%, I'm like 70% sure. Then I can build off of the stronger opinion there and assume that it is 3 and do the sujood sahu as well, right? But if I was building off of the first scenario, then I remembered with certainty, then I cannot continue on anymore. You have to go back and you cannot add on the additional rak'ah. Wa iyyakum. Yes, brother. You got the courage to ask, huh? I'm teasing. MashaAllah, he always has a lot of good questions, alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I have two questions. One is, let's say if somebody is on a plane and is a traveler, how would they know if it's the time for Salah? Because they are going across many countries and the countries have different time of Salah. So how can they know which Salah is it?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. Usually what you want to think of is the time where you started and the time where you're going to end, and what prayer times may come in between. And then you sort of gauge what you're going to need to do, right? So, for example, if I'm going to travel from here to America, it's very different than if I'm going to travel from here to Turkey or Saudi Arabia. So you need to kind of gauge, okay, this is going to be a 9-hour flight from here to Saudi, 8.5 hours. So what time am I leaving here? What prayer times are going to pass in the process? Now, of course, because they're before us by like 5-6 hours when I'm going to the Middle East, then there's a good chance I may not have to do any prayer, because I may leave here early morning after Fajr and I'm arriving there and it's going to be afternoon. So technically, it's still plenty of time to pray Dhuhr and Asr. So if that's the case, then I shouldn't pray on the plane. Praying on the plane is like a last resort. Unless you're on maybe like a Saudi Airlines. Saudi Airlines, they have a surah. They have a surah in the back. You can stand up, you can pray. They show you which way is the Qibla, and you can do the prayer. Some planes will also show you the time where you're flying over right now. Or you can also gauge it. Like, okay, I'm flying over India. India is 2.5 hours before Malaysia. In Malaysia, it says it's 10:30. That means in India, it's 8 a.m. And when you look outside, you'll be able to tell as well. The problem now is they use that auto tinting on the window. So they darken the windows. There's no more thing that you lift like the old days when in the no technology. Now everything's with technology. You think it's dark and it's already, the sun is up. So you can't always tell what's going on where you're at. I think the hardest one to do when you're on a plane is Fajr, because it's night and you're trying to gauge when Fajr has come in. And Fajr is not sunrise. Fajr is very slight light on the horizon. If you're up in the clouds, you cannot really see it clearly. Sometimes you can ask the stewardesses if they're Muslims and you're on a plane that has Muslims, it's a Muslim airlines and so on. But you have to try to gauge it and time it as best you can. You'll also, if you're on a plane full of Muslims, notice a few people who are committed are monitoring these things, and they will get up and they will go to pray, or they will start praying in their seats. Majority, unfortunately, just kind of sleep through it. They don't pay attention, they don't even care, and that's unfortunate. But where there's a will, there's a way. If you're keen and you're interested and you're looking, you'll find it, inshallah.
Also, Sheikh, the second question is, what happens if a traveler misses praying Qasr?
If the traveler misses praying Qasr.
Like, for example, they pray Dhuhr, for example, and they were praying in Jama'ah with the Imam. They finished praying 4 rak'ah, and they thought they were like a mustawtin, like a mukim in that area. So, and they forgot that they're a traveler.
No, the idea is when you're going to pray behind an Imam, you have to follow him. So in the book, they mentioned that as one quick line. Maybe some of you didn't notice it. They said, you will shorten unless you are praying behind a local Imam. So when you go to a masjid and you pray behind the local Imam, he prays 4, you have to finish with him. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامَ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ. The Imam has been appointed, has been put there to be obeyed and followed. You have to follow him, right? So you cannot deviate from what the Imam is doing. So if he prays 4 rak'ahs for Dhuhr, you pray 4 with him, no problem, even though you're a traveler, right? Now let's say you lead the prayer. Then what happens? What should you do? Should you lead like a traveler or like a resident? Like a traveler. And then what happens? The people who are residents behind you, they have to what? Get up and finish. And the Prophet ﷺ even used to make a comment after the prayer that I am a traveler So basically, those of you who are residents need to complete the prayer. Okay? Wa iyaakum. Yes, sister. No, I can't hear you so well without the microphone, sorry. It's a bit far away.
If we are going to travel, so before we begin our travel, we have completed our 4 rakats of Zuhur.
Okay.
Then we begin our travel.
Okay.
So when we get to the destination, can we do just Qasar 2 rakat or we have to do 4 rakats of Asr?
Sorry, say it again.
We have done our 4 rakats of Zuhur.
Okay.
Then we begin our travel.
Okay.
Then when we reach our destination,
Okay.
we have to perform Asr, right? So do we perform Asr 2 rakats Qasar, or can we perform Asr 2 rakats Qasar on its own?
It depends on your status. How long are you staying at that destination? Are you still considered a traveler? So if you're still a traveler, then you can still continue shortening and pray like a traveler. But let's say the scenario is more like when you're coming home. Like I'll go to Port Dickson with the kids and we leave there at Maghrib and we decide not to pray on the road. We just drive it all the way and then we get home and now it's Isha time. Now we're going to pray Maghrib and Isha. We're going to pray them full. We're not going to shorten anymore because we're home. So we have to pray them full. So I sometimes I'll say to the kids, like, it's easier if we pray it while we're in the traveling. You're going to get to shorten it, right? Because by the time they get home, they feel exhausted and it's like, oh, but you know, we have to pray. So we end up praying the full. You combine them, but you end up praying full.
Okay, but can Qasar be just perform just 2 rakats of Qasar alone without the Jama'?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you could do Qasr without Jama', yeah.
So that means when we reach that destination, we're still a traveler. To perform Asr, we can do that 2 rakats of Asr alone.
So if you're still in the state of being a traveler, you've already prayed Dhuhr, it's Asr, you want to pray Asr as a traveler, as far as I know, you can pray Asr as 2 rakats, yes.
Actually, we have the option, like we know we're going to travel after Zuhur. So therefore, we should actually do 4 rakats of Zuhur and 4 rakats of Asr Jama'. Is that right?
No, you cannot do that until you begin your travel.
Yeah, but
so if you're just sitting at home and it's Dhuhr time and you decide you want to pray Dhuhr before you travel, you cannot pray Dhuhr and Asr together if you haven't started traveling yet.
So the Jama' is actually once you begin, then
so the Jama' and Qasr for the sake of traveling can only be done once you've started traveling.
Okay.
So let's say I leave from KL, I get on the outskirts of KL, I get to KLIA, and I'm waiting for my flight, and now it is Asr time. Asr time is about to come in, and I haven't prayed my Dhuhr yet. So now I'm already as a traveler, I'm going to combine, do Jama' Ta'khir, and I'm going to do Qasr as well. So I pray 2 rak'ahs for Dhuhr, 2 rak'ahs of Asr at the airport before I get on the plane, so I don't have to then worry about my prayer on the plane, right? I want to do it while I'm standing and facing the Qibla and so on.
So I can't.
So you cannot pray like a traveler while you're still at home before you've started the journey. You gotta start.
Although I just do Jama', not Qasar.
No, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Allah knows best. Okay. Any other questions or comments? It's always a lot of fiqh questions, mashallah. Okay, we'll end there, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Walhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.